All right, everyone, so this is Andrew Morris, ruining security models with SSH. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. This is going to be really interesting because I planned this for 30 minutes, and it's not. So we'll figure it out. I'll try to figure out some live demos. You guys can just shout stuff out, and we'll figure it out. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. So this is ruining security models with SSH. My name's Andrew Morris. A little bit about me. I'm a penetration tester at a Northern Virginia-based consulting company. I hold the Offensive Security Certified Professional and the GIAC Exploit Researcher and Advanced Pen Tester. In my free time, I like to play music and find confusing GIFs on the internet. Like this guy. I don't know. Hey, don't ask me, I have no idea. So, just a little overview of kind of the things we're going to talk about a little bit. We're going to talk about authentication, basically how SSH authenticates, stuff like that, how to abuse how SSH authenticates. We're going to talk about like scripting and how to use SSH to run scripts on machines without actually dropping anything on the machine, file transfer, traffic tunneling, and hiding from sysadmins, stuff like that. This talk is originally geared kind of towards penetration testers and kind of offensive security types, because that's what I do and that's what I know really well. From a defensive perspective, this is stuff for the defensive guys, just for you to know about and to be aware of if you run a lot of SSH in your environment.
Excuse me one second, Andrew. Hey guys, if you're streaming in here, okay, first of all, probably shouldn't do that, but you gotta turn your microphone off.
Oh, are we gonna get echoes?
Getting echoes.
Got it.
Turn off the, did you turn off the mic? The other mic?
I have no idea.
Okay, yeah, we're hearing two voices, one's delayed.
All right.
Okay.
I have no idea what to do about that.
Keep going.
All right. So this is how you can authenticate to a machine over SSH. This is one of the ways. So if you have code execution on a Linux machine that's running SSH, one of the things that you can do to gain interactive access to that machine is to generate just a quick public key on your attacker machine with SSH-keygen, and then you transfer it to the machine and you drop it in home folder .sh authorized keys. So you can do it with that little command right there. So who cares, right? A user can change their password all day, their actual Unix password. They can change it all day, but as long as that SSH key is present, you can still authenticate. So it doesn't matter what they change their password to. So if you've got code execution on a machine or whatever, and you're trying to upgrade it up to an interactive shell where you can run stuff like VI and top or whatever interactive commands, you can do that now. And it's also an effective backdoor technique if you're like, doing a red team exercise or something like that. If the defensive person is not very Linux savvy, so they are not aware that a key in that specific location will allow somebody to authenticate. Yes?
One thing I saw in, it was a conference in Germany, usually held in Berlin. It was in Hamburg this year, Chaos Communications Conference. One of the guys was presenting an open source tool. It's called Shark, I think. So the whole keys, putting them in place has been an issue for a while because there's really no way to validate those keys.
Yes, that's true.
Unless you remove them. So what Shark did was actually allowed you to kind of create like a revocation list that says like if this key's gone bad, you can then essentially nuke it and stop somebody from accessing.
Sure.
Just a little side component to the...
Understood. I appreciate that. Yeah, it wasn't really a question, but it was a statement. The gentleman was saying that in the Chaos conference that's usually held in Berlin, but in Hamburg, Germany this year, the crew that was running it came up with a response to one of the fundamental problems with SSH key-based authentication, which is that you can't really revoke keys. It's not easy to do. They came up with a tool called Shark, which solves that problem if a key goes bad. Thank you. So what does this look like over the wire if you're a network guy, right? Well, it's going to look like SSH traffic, obviously. So this is all you're going to see. You're not really going to be able to see anything. One of the cool things about SSH is that even if you do, it uses Diffie-Hellman public-private key authentication. If you do even if you have all of the keys, if you have all sides of everything, you still can't see the traffic. There's random nonces. So even if you've got this guy's public key, private key, and this guy's public key, private key, if you're sniffing the wire, you still will not be able to read the traffic because there's a random nonce each time. So file transfer, how can you do file transfer with SSH? If you've used a lot of SSH, you already know this. But by default, SSH servers allow inline file transfer. So it's the same kind of thing as FTP. It uses FTP-ish syntax, get, put, cd, and you can also use SCP, which is a lot more script friendly. So this is cool because what a lot of people don't realize is that if you've got if you have an SSH server, people just assume like, yeah, you can run commands. You can also upload and download files directly through it, which is kind of neat. It's just something to consider. So who cares, right? You can upload your tools. You can put your rootkit.tar.gz and data exfiltration, right? If you're a pen tester or if you're a red teamer. Moving 4 gigabytes of source code or databases, that looks terrible, right? If you've got anybody who's looking at stuff over the wire, it'll trip up all kinds of things. Tons of SSH traffic looks marginally less terrible, right? And it's encrypted, so it's good for pen tests. If you have to move PII or stuff like that, not that you would want to do that, but if that's what you do, it's good for pen tests. Over the wire, what does that look like when you're transferring files? Well, it still just looks like SSH. It's the cool part. Tunneling traffic. So this is going to be kind of the meat of it. Again, this talk is planned for 30 minutes. You guys are kind of stuck with me. I'm sorry. If you get too tired of it, just throw something at me and I'll get on out of here. You can tunnel traffic from a client network to a server network over SSH. You can tunnel traffic from the server network to the client network over SSH. You can do dynamic tunnels, which are SOCKS proxies that do everything. That's a lot more seamless. Anything is possible if you in terms of traffic manipulation with SSH. It really is. I mean, if you run into a networking situation where you have to run, let's just say, for example, there are no egress ports on one. There are no ingress ports going to one server, but there's one egress port. But you have to communicate with a completely separate server somewhere deep inside that network. You can tunnel stuff all through SSH. We'll talk about that a little bit here shortly. Local tunneling. This is the most useful kind in my opinion. I want to move traffic from my network. I want to launch exploits or do whatever from my network to the server network. This is the syntax to do that. The purple doesn't really show up at all. That was a terrible decision on my part. But this command says SSH-cap-L 3389:192.168.1.2 whatever arbitrary IP address :3389, and then that last part that you cannot see at all is andrew@homeserver.com or whatever. So the green part, the -L, is specifying that I want to invoke a local tunnel. The red part is the port that I want to open on my machine when I do it, on my client machine. The blue part is the IP address that I want the remote server to connect to. The yellow part is the port that I want the remote server to connect to. And then this is the actual who I'm establishing the SSH connection with, the purple part, that is, that you cannot see one bit. This is what it actually looks like if it makes it make a little bit more sense. So this is me, I'm the client. Everything between me and the server is SSH traffic. So when I run that exact command that I just said, what that's going to allow me to do is actually RDP to myself, RDP to 127.0.0.1 or whatever. It will go through the SSH tunnel that I just invoked, and it will come out between those two servers up there on the remote network. So this is the command up here in the top left, and this is what's actually happening. This is a little key guide, whatever. This is all SSH traffic. This is all RDP traffic. It's very, very cool for tough networking situations. Who cares, right? But you can hide your traffic. You can make anything look like SSH. It's cool. I mean, like if you're downloading, a file over FTP, you can make that look like SSH. That'll be a little tricky, but if you're doing, if you're browsing to a weird website that you don't want anybody to see, you can tunnel that over SSH. You can download evil stuff, right? If you're on a network that has, crazy proxy rules or IDS, IPS, they don't let binaries travel over the network, things like that. Everything looks like SSH, right? You can get any protocol in and out of the network as long as SSH is allowed. So screw firewalls, right? Because once you've got code execution on a machine or you've got access to something that has SSH, you can get anything in and out that you need because you can do it all through SSH. You can point to localhost to bypass host-based firewalls. That's kind of neat. That's a little trick. So if I'm a pen tester and I pop a machine with a client-side exploit or whatever, and I have a shell running on a machine, I want to RDP into that machine, but I can't because obviously I'm not even routable to it and it's got a host-based firewall or whatever. I can actually tunnel through, I can have it SSH, I can download like Plink or something like that, and I can actually have it SSH back to me and have a tunnel established that way. So it's very interesting when you start getting into it. Over the wire, what does this look like? When you're tunneling any kind of traffic, well, it just looks like more SSH traffic again.
So
We have a question in the back.
Yeah, so the only way you're really going to do any, not the only way, but I mean, one of the ways you're actually going to start looking at that is if you know what your normal amount of SSH traffic is.
Yes.
And so, so if you're doing traffic, traffic monitoring, and you see SSH traffic on a particular box or a set of boxes that are either higher or unexpected because there shouldn't be any, that's when you start calling around and saying,
What's going on here?
what's going on?
Right.
And then so from there is where you got to start your investigation.
Sure, exactly.
You got to have an idea of what SSH traffic's on your network and where it should be going so that the anomalies can be investigated.
Absolutely. The statement by the gentleman in the back was because you can't actually see what's occurring underneath the traffic at all, the way that you're going to combat this as a defensive person is by knowing your known good levels of SSH traffic and where SSH traffic is used. So obviously, if you've got a strictly Windows environment and you see SSH traffic leaving it and going out to the internet, that's weird. You're not used to seeing. That's where you're going to start the investigation. There has to be a better way than doing those really, really annoying static tunnels for each port. There has to be a better way. There has to be a better way. Sorry, I could watch those all day. So there's these dynamic tunnels that they're literally SOX proxies that you can spawn natively over with SSH. It's really cool. You can spawn a SOX proxy and it automatically moves everything for you, so you don't have to specify the host and stuff. It's literally the same as a SOX proxy, but where the traffic goes in, on my box where it's a SOX proxy, it's coming out of the other machine, wherever I'm telling it that I want it to go. So now you can use your scanner or your web browser or your IM client or World of Warcraft or whatever over SSH. This is where it starts getting like a little cooler. You can start to kind of think about, well, the first couple things I was talking about, that can be a little bit unwieldy, but if you can spawn a SOX proxy or something like that, then that's a lot handier. A lot more stuff is SOX aware, and so you've got SSH-D 8080. That's literally all. That's it. That's the only thing you need to do. It's super easy.
Sure, but you can run the SOX client or the SOX proxy on the machine you're coming into.
There is no SOX. This is natively an SSH. So if I'm SSHing to Andrew at andrewmorris.xxx, there doesn't have to be a SOX anything installed. It all is native through SSH.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to do my -D. Port 8080 is going to open up on my client machine, and then any traffic that I shove through it is going to travel over SSH to that machine and come out unencrypted at the other side.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is useful for, I don't want to say it, but this would be useful for, so if you're at a Starbucks and you don't trust the network or anything like that, if you're on an untrusted network but you're addicted to Facebook or something like that, right? You can spawn a SOX proxy like this by SSHing to your server wherever over the internet, moving all of your traffic over SSH to your server, and then having it come out and exit at the internet. So that's one of the useful scenarios. But wait, there's even more. There's so much more that you can do. It's neat. Tunneling anything over SSH at all, right? So if you combine SSH tunnels with proxy chains, so those dynamic tunnels I was just talking about, proxy chains is a Unix tool that allows any application to be run through a proxy. So like, let's say you have your whatever that's not proxy aware, your tools that aren't proxy aware, you can just use proxy chains. This is actually will come in handy a lot if you start to implement this in your toolkit or whatever. You can do Nmap scans over SSH by prepending the command with proxy chains. You just configure it to look at your SOX proxy that you spawned when you establish the connection. You can run SMB client over SSH. You can run entire Nessus scans over SSH. That sucks. It's really painful. If you do want to do that, just a bit of advice, lower the timeout threshold significantly, because it's going to take a long time, but it will work. It will work. This is kind of useful. So I used to call this the Advanced Persistent Vulnerability Assessment, but when I was on a client site, this has happened to everybody. I know it has. If you're a consultant, you roll up, you're ready to do your job. You say, look, I've got to scan these boxes. They've been aware of it for 3 weeks or a month or however. You get there and they're like, oh yeah, we got to put in those firewall rules. And you're like, dude, what were you doing for the last month? You knew I was coming today. So they're like, yeah, you're going to have to hang out for 3 days until we get those firewall rules put in place. Jesus Christ, all right, whatever. So this is cool because if you come in and you don't have to say no, don't even put in your firewall rules. Just give me access to one machine that has access to everything. Now I'll just tunnel SSH and do it all from that one machine. I'll SSH to that and spawn my proxy, or I'll do my tunneling or whatever. You can even do SSH over SSH. It just blew my own mind. You can actually establish SSH tunnels inside SSH tunnels, and you can do whatever you want. It's crazy. It's absolutely insane. SSHception. Who cares about tunneling? You don't need to be privileged, so that's cool. You don't have to install any additional tools. So if you are on a Linux machine and you are just not getting anywhere on it, or on a machine in general, you just say screw this box and just tunnel through it, pivot through it, right? Go to other machines. Let's say you pop a perimeter Linux machine on a pen test, and on the inside, you can't get anywhere on it. You've got nothing. But on the inside, you've got all kinds of soft, mushy, server 2000 machines that you can pop in 5 seconds. Just pivot on through. Let's say one of those has SSH keys for root for that machine. Bam, you've tunneled through and popped the box and come back. It's enabled by default. If SSH is enabled, then you can tunnel by default. And like I was saying, if you compromise the DMZ box, you don't have to have root. You can launch exploits at the internal network. You can connect the shares on the internal network. You can execute vulnerability scans on the internal network. I don't know why you would do that, but you can. And you can browse internal sites. So these are some... Oh, I'm sorry, sir.
So what if you pop a Windows box?
Sure.
So, but is SSH installed by default?
No, it's not. So if you do pop a Windows... I'm glad you asked this because I think I forgot this in this presentation when I updated it. So you pop a Windows box. There are Windows SSH clients, so you're not going to be able to do it natively, but they don't require admin to install or anything. There's standalone binaries. PuTTY is a great one. Plink is a command line SSH client that you can use. The usage is very similar to Unix SSH. You can do tunnels with that. You can do everything with that. So what I would honestly recommend if you can manage it, the PuTTY installer contains PuTTY, Plink, PSFTP, PSCP. It contains all kind of useful stuff. But if you can't, Plink will do just fine. The question was, by the way, the question was, what if you pop a Windows box? They don't have SSH installed natively. All right, so here's some stupid tricks that I've learned, figured out over the past couple of years that I think some people may think are useful, and some people are going to hate me. So Andrew, renegotiating a separate SSH session for each tunnel totally sucks, and it makes for a lot of logs. The problem with what I was talking about earlier is that you notice that the tunnel itself was negotiated in the SSH command. So if you want to talk to something else, you have to exit, go back, retype a new command, go back in. And it gets to be unwieldy and troublesome, and it's obnoxious and annoying. So you can actually do it in line with bash. You can actually drop out of an SSH session and negotiate a new tunnel in line without negotiating an entirely new session. The default escape key is the tilde key, and then you just do a carriage return, tilde, shift C, and then you can insert whatever tunnel arguments you want. This is an example down here. Let's say I'm SSH'd into this box. I do that, it drops you to this little SSH prompt. You just type in --D 8080. It says forwarding port, and you're good to go. You don't even ever have to establish a new session. So that's kind of useful just to know. God, I'm not even 30 minutes in yet. Oh no. I'm like 20 minutes in. This is horrible. All right. You can run a bash script through SSH. This is kind of useful. So you pop a box, you've got SSH access to it, and you can run SSH Andrew at Andrew Morris, and then your argument is bash -s, and then read from the script that's on my machine. It'll execute scripts through SSH.
I think to make that work, you would have to put the double. You'd have to close the double quote after the -s to make the read.
Oh yeah.
Locally.
No, actually, you wouldn't, because that's the command that's reading from my machine.
Well, what I'm saying is that if you pass that to the remote machine, wouldn't the remote machine be trying to find?
Oh, it would try to. You're exactly right. That's a typo. Yeah, the question was, that's a typo right there. I would have to close the double quote, otherwise that command would be trying to read script.sh from the remote machine. Good call, sir. You can do a layer 3 tunnel. You can actually do full VPNs over SSH. All of the aforementioned SSH tunnels were at layer 4, just TCP tunnels. They only allow us TCP connections. Establishing a layer 3 tunnel is possible, but it's a pain. It creates a TUN interface, so it's SSH-W5:5 root at server or whatever, and it will give you TUN5 or whatever as an interface. Now you've got TCP, UDP, and ICMP. You can ping boxes. You could even grab a DHCP lease if you wanted to. You could communicate with DNS. You can do whatever. You can think like highly secured at peer-to-peer SSH botnet or something crazy like that. The reason this kind of sucks though is because they're not enabled by default, these settings. So you have to have root on the box to make the configuration changes, and it's more advanced to set up. It's kind of a pain. Hiding from sysadmins. This is done this a couple of times on red team engagements, and it's driven a couple people nuts. So it's completely trivial to hide from stuff like who, W, last log on most machines by default. They all pull their data from utemp. So utemp data with SSH is logged when you attach to the sudo terminal. It's not pulled. The data is not logged when bash executes or when you authenticate. It's logged when you attach to the sudo terminal. So if you do this -T flag, which suppresses attachment to a sudo terminal, that data, that's not logged. So it looks something like this. Here's a before. You can do this yourself. It's a lot of fun. You'll totally ruin people's lives. Here's before. You SSH into a box, you run who, or you run W, and it says, look, Andrew's logged in from that IP address over SSH, right? So then if you go back, and if you actually negotiate it with that -T, and your argument, the command that you want to run is bin bash, it doesn't show up. But you're still executing commands. So if you've got somebody that's logged in, they're going to run who to see who's logged in. You're executing commands, but you're not showing up.
Will your stuff show up in PS?
Yes, the processes will show up, absolutely. Okay. And so you'll be able to see that bash is spawned as a child process of SSH, but just when people are running who, last log, stuff like that, that stuff is not going to show up.
So if the only thing you're losing there is like if you try to run 5, like that would.
Right, that's all you're losing is the ability. The question was all you're losing is to run stuff like Vi. That's correct. You're losing the ability to run interactive commands. Anything that's going to interact with the terminal, Vi, top, stuff like that. That's going to look at the terminal itself. So being sneaky. One way to cover your tracks is by unsetting the hist file variable in bash. This prevents your commands from being logged, but it's a lot stealthier than blowing away the history of the user. So if you look in bash, in all the variables that are set, there's a hist file variable that's logging to probably .bash history, right? You can unset this, and it will make it so everything that you do in your session when you exit, none of it's logged. So it's kind of useful. It's a lot stealthier than obviously blowing away the entire history file, because somebody's going to hop into a system then and say, okay, somebody clearly blew away the history. Blackmail your rivals. Once you've gained root access, it's actually really easy to manipulate utemp into displaying whatever IP address or string that you want it to when who is invoked. So this is kind of cool. If you have root on a box, you run who, it's going to say, look, I'm logged in from 10.10.10, whatever. But if I blast var run utemp through sed, and I do a substitute for everything that says that IP address to this other IP address, then if you run who again, or w, it's going to say I'm logged in from a completely different IP address, but I'm definitely not logged in from that IP address.
Do you know if wtemp swap file format is sensitive to length? Like, if you were to
I am so glad you just asked that. All right, so the question was, do you know if wtemp data is sensitive to lengths in the buffer spaces? Yes. The answer is yes, and I go into that here next. Why stop there? You don't even have to write another IP address. You can write whatever you want, as long as it's the same length as the IP address, right? So you can actually blast sed, and you can do Nicolas Cage. So somebody's going to run who, and it's going to say, you're logged in from Nicolas Cage. You can do that. I mean, we do this on Red Team stuff, and you get people who run it, and they just like this like dead gaze comes upon their face. And they have no idea what's going on. They think that like I mean, obviously they're being like hacked, but oh god, like what do I even do? My whole world is being flipped upside down.
Shut down Nicolas Cage.
God, Nicholas, you've gotten me again. So who cares, right? SSH is a very, very underrated protocol. It's extremely versatile. It's very, very powerful. If SSH is a focal point of security in your environment, be aware of these things. Be aware that these, I'm not saying, you don't have to recompile your SSH so that you can't, do the -t option so you always attach to a terminal. You don't have to go through, if you're a highly secure network, sure, you can do that. But just be aware of this kind of stuff. This kind of stuff can be done. And if you're a pen tester, like me, go forth and practice your SSH gymnastics. I mean, you can do some really, really crazy stuff. It's really useful. So this is where I would usually be ending, with 5 minutes to spare, perfectly on time. But I got some questions. Thank the Lord Christ above. Sir?
Can you talk about like the proxy chains for Windows? Do you know any tools that work well for that?
So I'm glad you asked that. The question was, can I talk about proxy chains for Windows? So I found a proxy chains clone for Windows. I don't remember what it was called. I could not for the life of me get it to work. It was like, it was something that was written like 8 years ago and no one has looked at since then, and Windows 7 broke it, or whatever. I couldn't get it to work. If somebody else can get it to work, please shoot me an email, because that would be tremendously useful. Because if you're a Windows guy, then that's make tunneling a lot easier. Sir?
Just comment, proxy chains also don't compile well on BSD or other systems, so SOCAT comes to rescue.
Does SOCAT have that functionality built within where it will actually respect proxies?
Well,
Okay.
It's used for the same stuff.
I understand. So the statement that this gentleman just made was that proxy chains does not compile well on FreeBSD or OpenBSD?
On either BSD.
On BSD, period.
So
on BSD. So SOCAT is an excellent replacement. Someone over there raised their hand. Yeah, sir?
So what do you do if you're on a pen test
Sure.
and the corporation blocks outbound SSH?
So that's a great question. What do you do if you're on a pen test and a corporation blocks outbound SSH? It depends on what level they're blocking outbound SSH as. I've heard companies say, "Oh yeah, there's no way you can do that because we block outbound SSH, right?" No, they're just blocking like outbound 22. Yeah, you just hop it. If you've got an SSH client on your phone, you've got 3G, hop on your Linux box, SSH to your box or whatever. Change the server so it's listening on port 443. I can show you how to do that here in 2 seconds. Because what'll happen is they'll be blocking 22 unless they're doing deep packet inspection and they're actually seeing they've done port whitelisting where it's like, hey, why is SSH going out over 443? That doesn't usually happen. More often than not, they're just blocking outbound 22. I've seen that a lot.
Make sure you repeat the question.
Yes. He is.
Yeah.
Really? Absolutely. He's doing a great job.
Right?
Sometimes it's end.
Yeah, Rob.
Was this from the back room?
Ignore those guys.
Sorry, guys.
So do you know of a tool, like say you actually want to do it over HTTPS, do you know of a tool that, like SSH, like you could use it in SSH format?
I understand what you're saying. So the question is, and correct me if I'm wrong, the question is if you want to do SSH over HTTPS, like to make...
No, well, the question is, obviously the goal would be to defeat deep packet inspection.
Defeating deep packet inspection would be gigantic.
But are there like HTTPS tools that you can use? Like, hey, I want to create this global proxy, and I'm going to put
instead of having the traffic be SSH, it'd be HTTPS. It would actually be HTTPS traffic. There is from my background, I use Metasploit a lot. You can do the Meterpreter HTTPS, which all of their traffic looks like HTTPS, and then you can actually route and tunnel traffic through that. That's a little heavy. I don't know anything off the top of my head. I think maybe SOCAT or SBD would be able to do that.
So I don't have an answer for something that is just an HTTPS tool, but does similar port forwarding and stuff like that. But if you're in an environment that checks to see if it's valid SSL handshakes,
sure,
and then allows whatever to happen. There's a couple of options. If they are a proxied environment and they enforce that they must see a connect blah 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 4443. There's a little thing called corkscrew, and actually I don't know if Proxy Chains also has this feature, but I've used corkscrew a lot to get out.
What does corkscrew do?
Corkscrew is a little wrapper you can put around SSH in the proxy command parameter to connect to an HTTP proxy or HTTPS proxy,
sure,
and issue a connect blah blah blah.
Oh, it sounds kind of like proxy tunnel. A little bit.
Yeah. So you still need the SSH in that setup. You still need the SSHD on your server running on 4443, but it's a way to get out through a proxy server as
sure,
opposed to simply TCP.
Sure.
Straight.
I'm going to try to recap what you just said a little bit.
Sure. And then I have another follow-on thought.
Oh, perfect. Great. You guys, please keep going all day. The question / statement. Yeah, I've got like 20 minutes through, and I'm about to start dancing up here, I swear. The question / statement was if you're in a proxied environment where you have to get out and it absolutely has to be HTTPS traffic on the way out. This is kind of completely separate from my talk, but if it's a proxy that uses the HTTP connect method, you can use stuff like corkscrew is what the gentleman recommended. You could also use proxy tunnel, and you could still put it on 443, but this is just getting you out initially from the proxy server.
And then the follow-on thought, I think I've done this before, but I haven't needed to in a long time, so it's been rotted in my brain. But I'm pretty sure that I've been able to get SSH over STONL, with a STONL listener on the other end, decrypting it and pointing it at SSHD.
That's good for you. I'm glad I haven't been able to do that thus far.
Downloading a 4 gig file looks extremely different from a 2-hour-long CLI session in terms of bytes in and bytes out, the ratio and the bytes per second. So you're going to have normal file transfers that happen from host A to host B. But when host B sends traffic out over the internet in the gigs and gigs, then you have a problem. Authorized keys. So many times you want to allow somebody to SSH into a box using key pair or whatever, but you want to restrict what they are allowed to do. You want to make it so they can't just say dynamic port forward or port forward to this or port forward to that. You want to disallow X11 forwarding and blah, blah, blah. So authorized keys files have they're basically one line per public key that's allowed to come into that account. This key is allowed in, this key is allowed to authenticate, etc. But there's optional parameters at the beginning where you can say, this key can only come from this source. Which means, let's say I have one server that's allowed to log into a bunch of boxes as root to run a backup. But that key should never be allowed to come from anywhere but my backup server. So put that from equals in the authorized keys token. Now, if somebody owns your backup server and port forwards through it, that will be bypassed. But if somebody owns your backup server, you have other problems anyway.
Right. What about just replacing the use of of basically crappy keys in general with keys wrapped around with some attribute information, aka like a certificate, and apply the X509 patch for SSH.
Yeah.
And also do your Puppet integration to include the validation mechanism at that level, to where you might be doing some of what you're talking about in the sense of looking at keys, but also just replacing use of keys altogether with certificates, and then doing validation of those certificates, and then maybe supporting that a little bit with something else to cover the crappy weaknesses that are in the validation protocols.
Yeah. So to sum up, and if we're not broadcasting, it doesn't really matter if I repeat the question.
We are.
Sweet. Okay. So the question was in general. Actually, let me back up a little. SSH's public-private key pair stuff is, I mean, it uses standard encryption types, RSA, DSA, ECDSA, but it's relatively homegrown as far, other than that. It doesn't use X509 standard certificates out of the box. But what he's talking about is you can either built into some SSH flavors, I believe, or with optional patches. Maybe there are compile time options. I know, like for instance, in Gentoo, I think there's an X509 use flag that just, if you turn that on, it will get compiled with those patches. Anyway, you can do smarter public-private key off than just the RSA or DSA public-private keys that SSH uses. So if you use certificates instead, there's a whole bunch of other features that become available to you in the X509 certificate space. And I'm surprised, I thought you were going to go for hardware authenticated tokens as well, because once you're using X509 certs, it's trivial to get a little hardware token that you can put your private key on. Those are all good things to explore, I think. The one difference being they're not sort of out of the box. Everything I was talking about before is out of the box. Now you could go the extra mile, and it would be it's worth looking into. Ha! Sweet. Okay, I'm gonna shut up in like 5 seconds.
Oh no, do your thing, man.
Okay. So the one other thing that I was getting to in the authorized key stuff, I mentioned from equals. You can also say command equals. So again, let's say a backup server. All I can do when I SSH into that box as root is run a command that makes a tarball and PGPs it so that by the time I pull it down, I can't actually read it. Great. That way, if that backup server does get popped, you can't actually get too much out of it. So forced commands. And also you can say no port forwarding, which would, any attempt to do port forwarding would fail and get logged, and so you could see it.
Hank, that from equals field, are you specifically talking about the comment field for basically OpenSSH or SSH version 2?
Yeah.
Okay, well that's
actually no, not the comment field. It's a token before the actual public key string. So normally the thing will start, I believe, just with the key type RSA or DSA and the bit size, and then the base64 encoded blob. You can put tokens on the line before that specify restrictions on what that key can do. So from equals blah blah blah, command equals blah blah blah, no PTY, no port forwarding, no X forwarding, whatever. Or permit open only this port forward and that port forward and that port forward. So even when you do need to allow port forwarding, you can say this user can only port forward to these hosts and ports. So if somebody has compromised that key, they can't use it to go elsewhere. Is that was that? Did I answer your question or?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Well, no. Actually, the very beginning of the line. So before, normally it starts with key type RSA, DSA, bit size, and then base64 encoded string. You put it in the very beginning of the line, and it's there's a number of tokens that are supported, and you comma separate them. All this is in the SSH_config and SSHD_config man pages. Yep.
I don't know which one could answer this. But sorry. What is the sorcery behind when I have an SSH connection, VPN? Let's say it's through a VPN. I close my laptop. I drive home. I sit 30 minutes in traffic. I open my laptop. VPN is now establishing connection. I hit enter on the prompt that has not been closed out, and it magically comes back to life. I've not authenticated, I've not reissued the SSH command, the VPN tunnel was broken, and I clearly do not have internet access between that. What is that?
So I'm gonna. It's a good question. I mean, yeah, sorcery for sure. Probably very long timeouts and maybe a forgiving VPN server configuration.
That doesn't work for me.
Yeah, it doesn't work for me. That's why I think
Doesn't work for me either. I think it really is sorcery in your case.
I mean, for instance, do you know if in that case the VPN tunnel happened to give you the same client tunnel's source IP address when the tunnel came back?
It would have had to.
Yeah, that's the situation in which I could see it working. Anything else is brain fuck.
The same sort of type system would work with a system like Mosh, but you can't forward traffic.
Well, Mosh does extra magic.
What client do you use?
Just log in through OSX, command shell, terminal.
So the SSHD has some keep alives and idle timeouts and whatnot. I can't remember exactly what they're called, but whereby if it hasn't heard from the client in a certain length of time, it'll send some keep alive messages. And it's sort of similar to TCP keep alive, but it's inside the encrypted SSH stream. My guess is those timeouts are fairly high on whatever servers you're going to. Otherwise, the server would have given up on you and dropped the connection.
Yeah.
No, but what if he has site-to-site or his laptop-to-site VPN connection?
Is it site-to-site VPN client?
Well, I mean, at the network level, it's transcribed
Right.
to the SSH client, so that's why it never drops.
Right. Well, as long as his tunnel IP address is
3G
the same when it comes
something,
back
he
up.
moves from one place to another.
Not all traffic's tunneled. It's a split tunnel.
Mm-hmm. Now, as long as the tunnel, as long as your side of the tunnel has the same IP address the next time that it comes up, then connections that were connected to that IP would just continue if TCP hasn't thrown it out, or if SSHD. Now, that also suggests
That's the nuclear bomb resilience built into TCP.
Exactly.
So here's just a very super. Oh yeah, you're fine. Thank you so much. Can you guys give a round of applause to this gentleman who just single-handedly came up and saved my ass? This is an example of blowing away or blasting UTEP through SED to overwrite an IP address. If I do, yeah. So at this point, anything that pulls data from UTEP, I don't know if last does or last log does. But if I run who now, it's going to say I'm logged in from hey guys. The other thing would be, so now to show kind of one of the other things, if I run history, I'm actually really afraid to run the history command in front of all you guys.
And record it on YouTube forever.
Yeah, and record it on YouTube forever. All right, that's not that bad. So yeah, now lame. So now if I actually unset, so yeah, basically. So if you look at all your variables that are set, you've got your history file size, and the history size. So I can actually unset hist file, and then if I exit, so you guys see those things that are logged right there, who through sed through all those things or whatever. If I exit, and then if I actually sudo back up, and then now I do, oh god, I really don't like doing this. Okay, that's not that bad either. None of the commands that I just ran were logged. So, question, sir.
Just a comment. It's actually easier than that if you put a space before the command. It's not logged out.
Is it really?
Not on all systems.
Yeah, that's a setting in Bash. You can turn that off.
Yeah, it's a setting.
Okay, well, somebody just blew my mind.
It's actually a setting in InputRC.
Would you repeat that?
Yeah, I'm going to repeat that because I actually had no idea. If you put a space before a command in some configurations, it's not logged. That's news to me. I had no idea.
I know it's configuration.
Or, well, if it varies from system to system, then I would say it's...
What's the default? Is the import?
Let's find out. I happen to have a Linux box right in front of me this very second.
Every shell is probably fairly limited to Bash because it involved. It may not be another shell. I haven't tested it.
You shouldn't see this.
Oh god. Now, it was logged here. But, hey, look, I take your word for it. Half the stuff that I've tried to do today was a horrible failure, so it's all good.
So apparently it's tied to the hist control variable in Bash, and depending on the setting of that.
Apparently it's tied to the hist control variable, and it is tied back to that. I had
Read
no
a man
idea.
page.
I had no idea.
I'm going now.
Got it. Aside from that, really, I mean, so at this point, if I want a netstat to figure out what I'm running, and I want to tunnel to something from here that I would not otherwise be able to see, we can do this guy. So, all right, we've got MySQL that's running on localhost on 3306. So if I want to get around that, you can actually do it in PuTTY. What I'll do is I'll pull this up, Andrew at andrewmorris.xxx, and I switch this over to 443 because these guys do not do deep packet inspection. And then if I go over here to tunnels, source port, I want it to be 3306 on my box. Destination is going to be localhost or loopback on 3306. If I add this tunnel now, when I negotiate this tunnel, now if I open up a command prompt, if I run netstat and ptcp, I should have 3306 listening on my box. And I don't see it. Yep, there it is, 3306. So now, just to show kind of the practical applicability, it's right here for those of you who are not as blind as I am. So now if I had like Nmap or anything, which there's no way is going to be installed. So now if I telnet to myself on 3306, I have no idea what's actually going to happen. Well, there's no telnet. But the point that I'm trying to make at this point is that I could interact directly with the MySQL server, and if I had Wireshark here and we were looking at traffic between me and the machine, it would still just be SSH traffic. I'm going to go ahead and make the assumption that you guys don't have any more questions because I have been standing here BSing for the last 30 minutes. But in the event that somebody does, I'll be in that room right there. Thank you guys. Oh, hang on. Wait.
Close it out.
Hang on. Close that out. Wait.
You don't have to.
And oh God, whatever. Thanks for listening.
Shift F5 will play where the slide is.